The government today is far more tyrannical. If not, I'll even settle with being equally as tyrannical as the governments of 300 plus years ago. Equally as tyrannical as the monarch that the United States declared their independence from in 1776. And one of the things that this tyranny needs, just like all tyrannies needed before it, is money. Or more specifically, tax slaves. So I believe that going after income tax by repealing the 16th Amendment, by repealing the income tax law, I believe that we can rein in this tyranny a bit. And not just that, by getting rid of this involuntary tax on us, not only do we deal a severe blow to this tyranny's power source, we also will bring forth a government that will be more voluntary based. A government that we will have more of a say in because we will be able to vote with our dollar as well as at the ballot box. So let us begin by looking at the 16th Amendment. Okay, this is what I like to do. This is how I like to work. I like to say, what are we dealing with? Let's first correctly identify what we're dealing with before we try to address it. Okay, so let's identify the 16th Amendment, since that's what this video is about. So the 16th Amendment says, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration." Now, the most important part here in the 16th Amendment, the part that we are going to be paying the most attention to, are these first couple of words. The Congress shall have power. Okay, so the 16th Amendment is clearly granting a power to the federal government, specifically a power to Congress. Okay, now let's show exactly which amendments this is violating. Okay, so now the first thing it's violating is the 10th Amendment. Let's look at the 10th Amendment. So the 10th Amendment clearly says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. The 10th Amendment, the purpose of the 10th Amendment, was to put a cap on the federal government's power. After the 10th Amendment, the federal government is not to receive any more powers. And, to understand this, to bypass the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court can't come in and be like, oh, that's not what it was for, that's not what the 10th Amendment means. Fuck the Supreme Court. We don't need a couple of assholes who are chosen by another couple of assholes to tell us how to interpret something that's written in plain fucking English. Okay? And it's such a disrespect to think that we do. To say, oh, no, actually, sorry, we need these guys over here to interpret this thing that's written in plain English. It's like, how fucking stupid do you think we are? To understand why the 10th Amendment is most definitely a cap on government power, to be able to better interpret the Constitution than the Supreme Court, you have to understand where these things came from. You have to understand the history of the creation of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It's actually horrible that they don't teach this shit in public school. I went my whole life not knowing about the Anti-Federalist, and then I get into university. Fortunately, I was an English major, and I read the Anti-Federalist papers, and immediately I'm like, what the fuck, man? How come they didn't teach us this shit? But anyway, I digress. I'm sorry, guys. So now to understand the Bill of Rights, to understand the Constitution better than the Supreme Court, we have to now go back to the Anti-Federalists and understand why these amendments came about. And so you guys know this information, these Anti-Federalist papers I'm going to be looking at right now, they are going to be coming from this book entitled The Essential Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers by David Mouton, or whatever, however you pronounce that. So on page 15 of this book, we come across the Anti-Federalist paper titled Address of the Minority of the Pennsylvania Convention. That's actually the abbreviated title. I believe the full title is The Address of the Minority of the Pennsylvania Convention to Their Constituents, or something like that. So, on page 15, it says this, near the top. The legislative power vested in Congress by the foregoing recited sections is so unlimited in its nature, may be so comprehensive and boundless in its exercise, that this alone would be amply sufficient to annihilate the state governments and swallow them up in the grand vortex of general empire. So clearly, this line here, this section that I've just highlighted here, is talking about the power vested in Congress. Okay, see, that's actually a complaint the Anti-Federalists had, was that the power being given to the government with the Constitution is basically unlimited. If you have a faction that takes over the three branches, they can do anything. They can pass any law. And this is why the 10th Amendment came about. Because the Anti-Federalists saw through this bullshit. And they're like, no, 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 no. We need an amendment that will address this. We need an amendment that will put a cap on the federal government, that will put a cap on this government being created. Now, going backwards a little bit to page 9, this is actually going to, a point I'm going to be making here is that income tax was already thought about way back then. Okay, the Anti-Federalists already covered it. So on page 9 in the same chapter, Address of the Minority of the Pennsylvania Convention, we find a list of suggested amendments. Now, what happened here was the Anti-Federalists in Pennsylvania, they were reviewing the Constitution, and they said, no, you guys, this Constitution does not guarantee any of these protections. So they created a list of protections or a list of suggestions that the Constitution should be amended with. And a lot of these actually did make it into the Bill of Rights. For example, number 4 here, if you read it, says that excessive bail ought not to be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel nor unusual punishment inflicted. Okay, so what is said here was taken to heart and actually was made it into the Bill of Rights. So now I'm going to get down to number 9. Oh, that's pretty funny. Number 9 on page 9. So it says here very clearly that no law shall be passed to restrain the legislators of the several states from enacting laws for imposing taxes except imposts and duties on goods imported or exported, and that no taxes except imposts and duties upon goods imported and exported and postage on letters shall be levied by the authority of Congress. See, right there, the Anti-Federalists clearly state, no, the government, the federal government, Congress, shall not be able to impose any other taxes. And this was something that they put forward. And I believe what they did was they came to a compromise, because if you look through these amendments, or through these list of complaints, a lot of them were grouped in with other amendments that made it on the Bill of Rights. For instance, the First Amendment covers a lot of the stuff here. And I believe the 10th Amendment was also supposed to cover this complaint. The 10th Amendment, which was a cap on their power, was supposed to say, no, you do not get to tax us on anything else. You do not get any more power than that. But anyway, moving away from the Anti-Federalist Papers and moving back into the realm of, I guess, current day reality, because I know people can say, oh, well, just because the Anti-Federalists said that doesn't mean it's true. Well, the cap on government power, the 10th Amendment, is fucking plain and simple English, okay? And the fact that the 16th Amendment starts off by saying that, we're authorizing power to the Congress, boom, right there. Okay, so you're violating the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment clearly says you should only have the power that's in the Constitution, and all the other powers, even if they're not listed anywhere, shall go to the states or the people respectively. So, whatever. Going on now to the what amendment are we at now? Okay, you know what? Let's go to the 14th Amendment. Is this the 14th Amendment? You know what, guys? I just realized I don't have the 13th Amendment in my shiza here. Where's my 13th Amendment at? You gotta be kidding me. Okay, I'm gonna have to put the 13th Amendment in here. So right now, we're gonna go to the 14th Amendment. Okay, so specifically, we're going to look at the Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. So here's what the 14th Amendment says. And by the way, the 14th Amendment is what they use to try to justify abortion. I'm going to talk about that real quick too. Let me first read the 14th Amendment, or at least Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. So, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. Now, I'm going to show what the 16th Amendment violates is the deprivation or the depriving a person of life, liberty, or property, because money is a form of property, and they're doing this without due process of law. Now, there's a difference. Without due process of law does not mean without due process of legislation. Okay, due process of legislation and due process of law are two different things. What this means is that they cannot deprive you of life, liberty, or property unless they have proven in a court of law that you have been guilty of a crime. Okay, then they can deprive you of your liberty. They can put you in jail. If there is a law of, execution, they can then also deprive you of life. And if they have shown that you have broken a law to unjustly achieve that property, kind of like civil asset forfeiture laws, where they have if they can prove that you sold drugs, they can seize your assets or something. I'm kind of against civil asset forfeiture laws because they're heavily abused. Let's say if there's a child, let's say if I have a son, let's say if I own a house and I have a son and that son is caught selling drugs, then they can say, oh, that son's drug money went into funding the house and thus now we can take your house. Absurdity. Okay, but I'm just trying to talk about how this is referring to due process of law. So this does not mean that they can create a law through legislation that can deprive you of life, liberty, or property and then be okay with it. No, that is not a justification. That is not what this means. So right there, though, the 16th Amendment is violating this. It is depriving us of property without due process. And yes, money is property. Here goes a little thing. Property law, legal definition of property law. Personal property, also referred to as movable property, is anything other than land that can be the subject of ownership, including stocks, money, notes, patents, and copyrights, as well as intangible property. Okay, so clearly that violates, or the 16th Amendment is violated by that. Now I'm going to just go off a side note and talk about how they try to use this to justify abortion. And it's actually funny. I found this out by talking to somebody who's currently going to law school. So the person who's going to law school, who's like, oh yeah, the clause, they're trying to say that that this is depriving the woman of her liberty. No, but the thing is, nobody has the liberty to take a life. Anyway, now, since I don't have the 13th Amendment here yet, I'm going to now just cover the First Amendment. I'm going to go over how the 16th Amendment may possibly violate the First Amendment. Now, this one is entirely up to interpretation. This is just, I say that this one's arguable. The 16th Amendment violating the 10th Amendment is not arguable. The 16th Amendment violating the 14th Amendment is not arguable. And I'm going to show soon, after the First Amendment, why the 16th Amendment also violates the 13th Amendment in a not arguable way. It's a fact. But here it might be arguable. Okay, so the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I would say that the 16th Amendment, by taking money involuntarily from people and then using that stuff on things that those people have no say in, you're violating that person's religion. What if that person's religion? What if you're a Christian, right? And this is actually what's happening. By our taxes funding things like abortion and war, more important than abortion, war, it's violating all those religions that are against murder, that are against war. What if there's a pacifist religion that's saying, hey, you know what? I don't want to be funding war. I don't want to be funding death and destruction and chaos. Guess what? Then the 16th Amendment, by taking that person's money involuntarily, you're violating that, and funding these things, you're violating that person's religion. That person is no longer exercising their religion freely. You're actually directly making this person violate their religion. And you know what? All religious people, they need to take that shit into consideration. They should have a very heavy conscience right now, because they have to realize, oh, guess what? You're indirectly breaking your own religious edicts. You're indirectly being a sinner. I'm not religious, but I'm just trying to stick up for the people who are. So now let's move on to the 13th Amendment. Okay, while putting the 13th Amendment in here, I realize this video is getting a little long, so I'm going to try to make this really quick, alright? So the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Beautiful. Now the point that I'm going to get to here is involuntary servitude. These are involuntary taxes. So of course, we can say they're involuntary servitude, but let's look at the definition of servitude. Okay, servitude, the first definition here is a condition in which one lacks liberty, especially to determine one's course of action or way of life. Okay, so involuntary taxes, boom, right there, you lack the liberty to determine the course of your actions or way of life. You know, right there, you are being hindered, but that's not the definition I want to focus on. The one I want to focus on is the one beneath it, which says very clearly, a right by which something, such as a piece of land, owned by one person, is subject to a specified use or enjoyment by another. Okay, once again, something, my money, which is my property, owned by me, by one person, is subjected to a specified use or enjoyment by another. The government comes in and says, no, that right there, that your money right there, we're going to now subject that to a different use. We're going to now enjoy that in a different way. Boom, right there, done, clear case. We don't need any fucking Supreme Court to figure this shit out.